Hi gang, in Warhammer 40k, the Space Wolves chapter are heroes of the Imperium of Man, one of the most famous Space Marine chapters, known for a fractious relationship with some of the more uncaring and brutal arms of the Imperium. But in their early years, as the Great Crusade spread out across the galaxy, it was the newly formed Imperium who would be horrified by the savage, brutal, and bloodthirsty way the 6th Legion achieved their victories. Hiya, welcome to Heresy 101. In this little series, I'm going through all the lore for each of Warhammer's Space Marine legions, particularly their origin in the grim days of the HORUS Heresy. I'll take a look at where they are at the start of the Heresy and how they got there, and then what happens to them during it. So be warned that this video contains spoilers for the HORUS Heresy Black Books and the Black Library novel series, and probably whatever else comes out in the future. The Space Wolves were always a legion apart, but that status as outsiders goes deeper than it seems. It wasn't just the result of the culture of their homeworld, Fenris, or the preferences of their Primarch, Liman Russ, but part of the way they were created, bred into their augmentations and genetics by the Emperor for a purpose nobody now knows. The history of the 6th Legion starts, like all the other legions, in the Unification Wars on Terra. The Emperor had risen from the chaos of the Age of Strife and conquered Old Earth, and was making ready to set out into the galaxy. His generals, the 20 genetically engineered demigods known as Primarchs, had been scattered, but enough of their genetic material survived to create the 20 Legiones Astartes. And as the first recruits completed their surgeries and alterations, they were deployed into the final battles of unification. Except for 3, the 6th, 18th, and 20th Legions were set apart by the Emperor for unknown reasons. Their development was secret, even by the standards of the Astartes project, though nobody but the Emperor knew exactly why. Whatever it was, in the case of the 6th Legion, it led to a much slower and more rigorous recruitment drive, with the most barbaric and violent of Terra's warring gun clans and tribes rounded up, and recruits assessed and inducted into the Legion on an individual basis, specific aspirants being assigned to the 6th. As the rest of the legions grew and departed Terra in command of various expeditionary fleets, there were still only a few hundred of the 6th, fighting without their own command and attached directly to the Emperor's fleet. But eventually they grew to a few thousand, and a decade into the Crusade, the Emperor declared that their first independent test would be against the world of Delsvan. Imperial tacticians and observers gathered, eager to see what this unknown legion would do, what aspects of the Principia Bellicosa were to be used in their new battle plans. The 6th Legion commander, Enoch Rathvin, selected the fortified capital of Massa Norcor as his target. He unleashed an orbital bombardment to cover a Legion drop deployment, a move similar to the standard spear-tip strike tactics Legions have been using so far, but it was there that the similarity ended. Every one of the 3,500 warriors of the 6th was deployed with no reserve in a number of strikes surrounding the city, and they all then moved inwards to engage. At every point, the defenders were met with fast-moving advances from multiple directions at once and overrun, slaughtered to a man. The 6th Legion moved through the city like a liquid, flooding point after point, leaving nobody alive and nothing undamaged in their wake, and only stopping when the city was completely destroyed. Imperial observers were appalled. This was mindless, destructive violence unbecoming of the legions. But the Emperor seemed pleased, and over the next few decades they were deployed again and again at his direct command against recidivists and human empires for whom only destruction was an option. By the rest of the Imperium, they were seen as barbaric, animalistic, and barely controllable, called the Rout as a slur. It was the name for a pack of wild animals. They drew unfavourable comparisons to the 12th Legion, then called the Warhounds, and seen as an example of how destructive ferocity in close combat could be tempered by strict discipline in the ranks. But the 6th didn't care. They took on the insignia of the crossed burning swords, also used by the Imperial Disciplinary Corps, and saw themselves as, a legion apart, operating on their own on specially selective missions. But this reputation as a destructive tide would be shackled early in the Crusade, when their Primarch was discovered on the icy death world known as Fenris. Leman Russ was the second Primarch to be discovered after Horus, and the planet he grew up on, Fenris, was relatively close to Terra, so much so that it's speculated the Emperor knew where he was all along. Fenris was one of the most inhospitable climates known to man, a frozen world of ever-changing continents and murderous wildlife on which a few incredibly hardy tribes scratched a living. Russ had risen to become the king of one of those tribes and master of the icy wilderness. But even though Fenris was a primitive world, Russ had no trouble accepting the teachings of the Imperium when they arrived. When the Emperor offered him a place at his side, Russ eagerly accepted and pledged his Varangi, his Huskarls and bodyguards, to the Astartes creation process, even though many of them were way too old. Those that survived were spread throughout his ranks, reinforcing the culture of his planet and passing down what was expected of the Sixth by their new warrior king. The Varangi of Russ were all veteran warriors too, and with them taking control, the previously fractious Sixth were bound to their High King through a system of almost fealty. As the Legion knit itself together through their first few campaigns, the Imperium's experiments with Fenris itself began. The environment had bred a particularly tough strain of humanity who seemed to be better able to withstand the 6th Legion's gene seed, and a huge fortress known as the Fang was created, with some of the most advanced scientific and medical facilities in the Imperium to mass manufacture warriors of the 6th. In fact, it's rumoured that the Imperium adjusted the environment of Fenris to make it more inhospitable, and imported mind-wiped tribes from other feral worlds to try and increase the population of suitable recruits. The entire culture of Fenris was adapted to serve the needs of the Legion, and then impressed on the Legion itself to bind it together, and this included superstitions, the reverence of ancestors, and the Emperor as All-Father, all spread amongst the tribes, and all stuff that was illegal in most of the rest of the Imperium. As the Crusade pushed onwards, the 6th Legion grew and were dispatched on numerous campaigns, and while many were the standard missions of compliance conducted across the entire Crusade, a disproportionate number saw the 6th assigned to missions against traitors and recidivists. And in these, the 6th exhibited the same tendency towards brutal, indiscriminate slaughter. For all the charisma and surprising subtlety of their warrior king, Leman Russ, they were still seen as savage barbarians, and their increasingly Fenrisian appearance and the animalistic traits their gene seed exhibited only encouraged that, earning them the unwanted nickname of the Space Wolves. The greatest turning point, though, was after the wars known as the Rangdan Xenocides, against the aggressive alien race known as the Rangda. Many of the largest legions of the early Great Crusade, like the Dark Angels and Iron Hands, suffered punishing losses during the war against the Rangdan Cerebvors. And in the aftermath of the conflict, whole sectors of human-inhabited space had to be purged to stop the taint of the Rangda spreading. These jobs fell to the Space Wolves, and after they were completed, their reputation had plummeted. Now came the whisper of executioner rather than warrior, and the image of the destroyer that had always been there in part came to replace that of the savage but noble conqueror. As for Leman Russ, for some he was no longer a warrior king as if sprung from the pages of legend, but a blood-splattered tyrant kept on the Emperor's leash, as feared as any who held sway in Old Night. In the 2nd century of the Crusade, as newer, stronger legions took the lead, the Space Wolves became a law unto themselves. They fought where they wished, accepting no orders except those directly from the Emperor. They kept no strongholds on other planets, as Fenris provided everything they needed, and approach to their system was on pain of death. The Imperium saw their rituals and superstitions, their death masks and priests, as suspicion and barbarism, and they became a feared legion. Barely understood, unleashed on secret missions against secret foes. When Horus was declared Warmaster, Russ and his legion accepted it as their duty, but Horus kept them at arm's length. When the Council of Nicaea raised the question of psychers within the legions, Russ argued strongly against them, despite using Shaman in his own legion. Apparently they didn't count as psychers because Fenris or something? And when the Librarius was banned, the Space Wolves continued as if nothing had ever happened. They were an inscrutable and unpredictable quantity to the rest of the Imperium, but one thing was known for sure: they were loyal to the Emperor. At the start of the Heresy, the Space Wolves were estimated to have an active strength of about 100,000 legionnaires. But though they weren't the biggest legion, and their warriors weren't objectively stronger than any others, The aura of fear that came with them was potent, and they were seen as a particularly strong threat to the traitor cause. By this point, the Legion deviated from the Principia Bellicosa in many ways. The Sixth was split into 13 great companies, each led by a Wolf Lord or Jarl, and with a set of sub-commanders also known as Jarls, or sometimes Thens, with only the loosest connection to comparable ranks in the rest of the legions. They used the term pack to refer to both squads and small task forces, so generally their organization was only understood by themselves. Though each great company fought according to the preferences of its commanding Jarl, the core of all of them was the infantry pack, and the Legion lacked many of the specialized units and formations found in other legions. There were exceptions. The first great company was home to the majority of the Varangir Terminators, and the seventh hosted many of the Legion's siege engines and destroyer squads, but all the great companies were primarily infantry companies. Their story during the Heresy, though, is an important one, as it starts with a battle that's either the first in the Heresy or the last in the Crusade, depending on who you ask. The burning of Prospero. Sensing that Horus was about to be turned to chaos, Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, ignored the Edict of Nicaea that banned the legions from using psychic powers and attempted to warn the Emperor, causing great damage to the Emperor's Webway project. The message itself was lost, and the Emperor ordered Russ and the Space Wolves Legion to Prospero, homeworld of the Thousand Suns, with orders to bring Magnus back in chains. But Russ was intercepted by Horus, whose secret fall to chaos had begun, and who convinced him that to bring Magnus back alive would be a waste of time. And so the Space Wolves fleet, aided by the Sisters of Silence and Legio Custodes, fell on Prospero, levelling its cities, slaughtering the civilian population, and killing the majority of the Thousand Suns Legion, who were arrayed in the open, awaiting their journey back to Terra. It was only at the end of the conflict, as Russ broke Magnus the Red's back across his knee, and the remnants of the Thousand Suns escaped into the warp, that Russ started to doubt his mission. These doubts would be confirmed in the aftermath as Horus's rebellion was declared at Isstvan III, and the Space Wolves fleet was pinned down in the Alaxes Nebula by the Alpha Legion, who'd recently declared for Horus. They were saved by a relief force of Dark Angels and a valiant rearguard action by the 13th Company, and realizing what he'd done, Russ made for Terra to aid in the defense, working with Rogel Dawn and Malcador on the Knights Errant project, including attempts to assassinate Horus. However, as these attempts failed, Russ grew impatient, and rather than waiting for the inevitable siege, Russ led the Space Wolves out to engage Horus and his forces at the Battle of Trisolian, which left Horus wounded but Liman Russ comatose, and with the Space Wolves fleet besieged at Yerant, the 6th Legion were knocked out of the rest of the war, suffering catastrophic losses. They never made it back to Terra in time to aid in the siege. And that's the 6th Legion. Born as a special project, a secret strain of Astartes, and barely controlled until they were yoked to a leader like Liman Russ. Nobody can be totally sure what the special purpose was behind their creation, but the 6th Legion and its Primarchs certainly regarded themselves as an exception in all things, as grim executioners and watchmen of the other legions. Whether that's true or not, it certainly guided Liman Russ's actions in the Heresy and led to the fall of one Loyalist Legion and the near destruction of the Space Wolves before the end. And while Liman Russ and his Legion eventually recovered into the chapter we know from 40k, they still remained an exception to the rule all the way into the 41st millennium. Thanks for watching. Okay, so if you'd like more Heresy info, then yeah, click on that little image there to the right for the next Legion. And if you'd like to see these videos early or support the channel, there's a Patreon link in the thing below. See ya.